They called her a criminal, but she was just a girl with a tender soul, crossing the border with torn feet and a heart made of paper. She wasn't chasing dreams. She was fleeing nightmares, from a place where no one listened, where silence was safer than screaming, where justice had never once knocked on her door. 19 years old, carrying more than her body could bear, a baby growing inside her, no name, no papers, no mercy waiting on the other side. The desert didn't welcome her. It burned, it bled her soles, it whispered, "Turn back," but she couldn't. She walked under a sky too big to belong to anyone, with a broken backpack, a worn t-shirt, and a folded photo of her mother still praying back home. They caught her just before dawn, near Laredo. Flashlights to her face, guns at her back. No questions that wanted answers, just numbers, just codes, just another illegal immigrant. In the detention center, the lights never dimmed. The cold seeped through every crack, like the building itself didn't believe she deserved warmth. And one night her body gave way. The baby came early, no doctor, no bed, just a cement floor and a guard who looked away. The cry was soft, too soft. She wrapped him in her own t-shirt, the same one that carried her through the desert, and she sang, low and trembling, a lullaby her grandmother used to sing at funerals. The judge never looked at her, not once. She wore pearls and perfume, but her words smelled like rust. "You people always run from your responsibilities," she said, before slamming the gavel like a tombstone. Deportation, without the baby. But the girl, the one they called a criminal, didn't scream. She didn't beg. She closed her eyes and prayed. Because when the world calls you worthless, when they take your child, your name, your voice, sometimes all you have left is a whisper to heaven. If you've ever felt forgotten or punished just for trying to survive, stay with me. This story wasn't meant to be beautiful. It was meant to be told. He was born in chains, not his mother's. But chains don't care whose wrists they hold. There were no flowers, no warm towels, no name tags or balloons, only concrete and a fluorescent light that flickered, like it couldn't decide if this moment deserved to be seen. The baby didn't cry much. His lungs, tired from the journey he never asked to take, his skin still trembling from the cold of this new world, his eyes closed. Too early, too long. They took him, 2 agents in blue gloves, no words, no goodbyes, just a clipboard and a form, and a mother left bleeding on the floor, still whispering a name she hadn't had time to give. She asked if he was okay. They didn't answer. She asked where they were taking him. They turned their backs, because here, a woman like her doesn't get answers, only echoes. Later, a nurse, younger than her, left a folded paper under her mat. No words, just a scribbled hospital code. And a name she didn't recognize, NICU, St. Juliana's. The girl couldn't read much English, but she understood the silence in that paper. It meant, your baby is still alive, but just barely. That night she didn't sleep, not because of the pain, but because of the song stuck in her throat, the one she meant to sing to him, but never got the chance. They told her she'd be transferred at dawn, back to your country, like she had one. She begged for 1 hour, just one, to see him, hold him, tell him something that mattered, but the officer just looked at her belly, now flat, now empty, and said, "That's not my job." Her hands curled into fists, not from rage, but from the ache of holding nothing. They took her fingerprints, again, and when she asked if her son had a name in the system, the woman behind the desk shrugged. Maybe, maybe not. Depends if he makes it. She didn't scream. She didn't curse. She just sat back down and prayed. Because somewhere in that hospital, wrapped in wires and beeping machines, was a tiny soul fighting to breathe, alone. And in her chest, a storm was building, quiet but unyielding. Because even the softest heart will start to burn when you try to take the only thing it has left. But then, just before they moved her, the nurse came back, her hands shaking. her eyes red, and in her pocket was something that would change everything. The nurse was trembling, not from fear, but from the weight of knowing too much and saying nothing for too long. She pulled something from her pocket, folded, soft, stained. It was the same grey t-shirt, the one the girl had used to wrap her baby, the one that had crossed the desert, that had soaked in blood, in tears, in milk that never had time to flow. Now it carried something else. Written across the inside collar in tiny, crooked letters was a name. Emmanuel. She had written it in pencil, back when the cramps started, back when she still believed she'd hold him in her arms that night. Emmanuel. God is with us. She didn't know much English, but she knew that word. Her grandmother whispered it every time soldiers passed by their village, every time a girl disappeared, every time no one came to help. The nurse pressed the shirt into her hands. "I'm not supposed to do this," she whispered, "but someone had to give him a name." The girl clutched the fabric like it was a heartbeat. Her lips moved, but no sound came out, only breath, only trembling, only the hollow echo of prayers that had run out of words. She stared down at the name, as if it were a door, still waiting to be opened. "I'll find him," she said. The words cracked in her mouth, but they held. "I don't care where they send me. I don't care how many walls they build. I'll find him." The nurse looked away, her face wet. She whispered, "You might not have time." The words sank like stones. "His lungs, they're weak. He's not breathing well. They don't think he'll last another day." And just like that, the room stopped breathing too. The metal bed, the cold walls, even the guards at the door. Everything held still, because grief doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just waits. She sat there, holding the shirt, holding the name, holding the last piece of him that hadn't been taken. And then she did something no one expected. She tore the shirt in two. One half she folded and tucked under her waistband, close to her skin, close to her vow. The other half she placed on the floor and began to write, not with a pen, not with ink, but with the weight of everything she couldn't say, a message, a name, a story, something no one would be able to erase, because if they were going to deport her, if they were going to take her without letting her see her son, she'd leave behind a voice, something that could reach him, even if she never could. And that message would soon fall into the wrong hands. She had no paper, no ink, no time, but grief makes its own tools, and hope knows how to bleed through fabric. With a sharpened bobby pin, she tore the words into the cotton, slow, jagged strokes, each letter carved like a wound. She didn't write much. She couldn't. Just a name, a truth, and a prayer. His name is Emmanuel. He is mine. I did not abandon him. She folded the cloth with hands that had stopped shaking. Because once a mother makes a vow, even the earth begins to listen. She slid the cloth under the thin mattress, right at the edge, where only someone searching with their heart could find it. And then they came for her. No warning, no goodbye, just a clipboard, just a hand on her elbow, just the word, transfer. They led her down a hallway that smelled like bleach and fear. No windows, no clocks, only footsteps that didn't echo, because this place was built to silence everything. She looked back once, just once, at the room where she had bled, where she had prayed, where her son's name still lived in cotton. The guard said, "Eyes forward." She didn't answer, but inside she was burning. They shackled her feet, her wrists, like she might run, like she had anywhere left to go, and outside, the world kept turning. A bus waited for her, steel grey, windows blacked out, a cage on wheels. Inside, other women, some with faces like hers, some too tired to look up. She sat down, chains rattling like broken lullabies. No one spoke, but one woman, across the aisle, held something strange in her lap. A binder, government issue, with tags, dates, photos. She was young, pale, eyes red from crying. She wasn't an agent. She wasn't a guard. She was a caseworker, new to the system, too new to know when to look away. Their eyes met. The girl, our girl, didn't say a word. but something in her gaze stopped the woman cold, like her silence had weight, like her story had fists. And then the binder slipped from the woman's lap, papers spilled, photos scattered, and there, on one tiny printed form, was a name. Emmanuel, male, admitted, condition critical. She saw it, only for a second, before the papers were scooped up, but that was enough to know he was still alive, and she was being sent away. But heaven had other plans, because that caseworker, the one who wasn't supposed to care, was about to break a rule that could cost her everything. Her name was Clara, fresh out of college, hair tied too tight, voice that cracked when she said "Mom." She joined the agency thinking she'd be helping children, but the forms, the quotas, the silence had taught her otherwise. They told her not to feel, not to ask, not to see. But that morning, when she looked into the eyes of that girl, the one in shackles, the one whose baby was fighting to breathe alone, something broke, not loud, not sudden, but deep, like a thread snapping, somewhere near the soul. Clara waited until the bus reached the transfer station. She stayed behind, said she had paperwork to finish, but her fingers weren't filling out forms. They were searching for that name, that slip of paper, that thread of truth the system wanted to lose. And when she found it, Emmanuel's file, filed under unknown mother, labeled abandoned at birth, she felt sick because she'd seen that same baby, wrapped in that same grey fabric. And she'd seen the mother, left bleeding on the floor. She remembered the shirt, the folded cloth, the quiet message she wasn't supposed to see. It had stayed in her locker, hidden, because part of her was afraid that if she gave it to anyone, it would disappear. Now she knew she had to act. She copied the file, not all of it, just enough. Name, hospital, diagnosis, chain of custody, and then she wrote something that didn't belong on government paper. This child was not abandoned. He was taken. She slipped the copy into her purse, and with trembling hands she called a friend, a lawyer, one who used to fight immigration cases before they burned her out. The call was short, dangerous, and full of quiet. Then Clara did something else she wasn't supposed to do. She asked for the girl's name. The guard hesitated. "You don't need that." But Clara looked him in the eye and said, "I do." He handed her a form, and there it was. Mariela Santos, age 19. Country of origin, Honduras. Status, to be deported within 48 hours. Clara read it, folded it, and pressed it to her chest. She didn't know how, or when, or if it would even matter. But she had made her choice. She would fight, not because she thought she could win, but because someone had to try. But what she didn't know, what no one knew, was that Mariela had already escaped. Not the building, not the chains, but something far more dangerous, the silence. And that silence was about to crack wide open. They thought she would stay quiet, thought her chains were enough. But inside Mariela something had begun to shift, not with shouts, not with fire, but with stillness. A kind of stillness that waits, that listens, that refuses to die. On the bus back to the holding facility, her wrists still cuffed, she sat with her head down, but her eyes open, wide, watching everything, every gate, every uniform, every shadow on the wall. She was counting steps, counting doors, counting minutes, because when you've lost everything, even numbers become prayers. The shirt was gone, taken, probably tossed in a trash bin or burned like it never mattered. But the words she carved into it, they stayed with her. She whispered them under her breath like a hymn only God was meant to hear. His name is Emmanuel. He is mine. I did not abandon him. They put her in a shared cell. 2 other women, one from Haiti, one from Guatemala. None of them spoke, but each carried something unspoken. Mariela could feel it in the way they held their knees close, in the way they flinched every time keys turned in the lock. That night, Mariela didn't sleep, not because of the noise, but because of the dream. A dream she would have again and again. She was standing in a field, barefoot, dust rising with every step, and in the distance, Under a tree with no leaves, there was a crib, not a real one, woven from twigs and wire. Inside, her baby, not crying, just watching her, silent, still. And when she reached for him, her hands passed through the bars, like she was made of smoke. She woke with tears on her face, a pain too old for someone so young. The next morning, something changed. They called her name, not inmate, not number, not subject for transfer, but her name, Mariela Santos. She didn't move, thought it was a mistake, but the guard repeated it, stern, impatient. She stood, heart pounding like footsteps in the dark. They brought her to a room she had never seen before. No bars, no chairs, just a table, one folder sitting on it, and across from it, a woman she didn't recognize, Clara. Hair pulled loose now, circles under her eyes, and in her hands the torn piece of grey cloth, the one with the name still carved in. Emmanuel. Mariela's knees nearly gave out. Clara didn't smile, but she didn't look away either. She spoke slowly, carefully, and even though Mariela didn't understand every word, she understood the heart behind them. "I know your son is alive," Clara said, "and I believe you." That was all she needed. Mariela didn't weep, she didn't shout. She simply reached across the table and touched the fabric, like she was touching her child's breath. It was the first time anyone had said they believed her, and the first time the silence in that place began to break. But as Mariela leaned back, something else caught her eye. A second folder, closed, thick, heavier than the first. Clara hadn't opened it, hadn't said a word about it, but something in her eyes, something trembling, told Mariela what was inside could change everything, or destroy them both. Mariela stared at the second folder like it had a pulse. It sat there untouched, thick with papers that breathed secrets, secrets that belonged to rooms she had never entered, and decisions made in languages she barely spoke. Clara didn't reach for it. Not yet. Her fingers stayed still, pressed against the edge of the torn cloth like it could ground her. "There's something you need to know," she said, her voice no louder than the hum of the vent. "But once I open this folder, there's no going back." Mariela didn't speak. She just nodded once, slow, the kind of nod that comes from a soul with nothing left to lose. Clara opened the folder. The first page was a photo. A woman, white, thin, with silver glasses, and a mouth that looked like it had never smiled. Mariela recognized her. The judge. Below it, a transcript. Words recorded in cold black letters. A courtroom with no warmth, no translator that day. No mother allowed to speak. The transcript showed her case had lasted less than 12 minutes. Clara flipped to the next page. A handwritten note from the judge. Infant most likely to become a ward of the state. No known relatives. Deportation of mother approved. Expedite. That word, expedite, like she was a shipment, a mistake being returned. Mariela didn't cry, but something in her posture shifted. Her shoulders dropped, not from weakness, but release, like a truth had finally found the light. And then came the last page. The reason Clara's hands had been trembling. A medical update from St. Juliana's Hospital. Signed. Dated. Emmanuel had stopped breathing for 12 minutes. He had been revived, intubated. And now he was in stable condition, but declared a ward of the court. "No one told you," Clara said, "because they didn't want you to fight." Mariela stood up. The chains on her ankles rattled, but they didn't matter. Her voice was still soft, but it carried. "He is not theirs," she whispered. "He has my blood, my voice, my name." Clara closed the folder. "I want to help you," she said, "but if I do, I could lose everything. My job, my license, maybe worse." Mariela looked her in the eye. Not pleading, not broken, just true. "You won't lose everything," she said. "You'll keep your soul." That night, Clara didn't go home. She stayed in her office, typed until her fingers ached, filed motions, contacted a lawyer who owed her a favor, printed photos, translated documents, everything the system said Mariela didn't have. She started to build, but time was running thin. The deportation was still set for sunrise, and across the city, Inside an incubator lined with wires and machines, little Emmanuel began to stir. His fingers twitched, his mouth opened, and for the first time since he was born, he cried. But that cry was heard by someone who wasn't supposed to be there, someone who now had a reason to shut everything down. There are people in this world who do their job so well they forget they're human. People who learn to treat pain like paperwork, tears like noise, and names like numbers. Her name was Judge Martha Ellison. Federal robe, perfect posture, and a history of decisions that rarely leaned toward mercy. She didn't hate women like Mariella. No, hate would require recognition. And to recognize someone, you must first believe they are real. She didn't. To her, Mariella was a situation, a category, a burden passed from one department to the next. But that morning when the hospital fax came through, when the alert reached her desk that the mother has filed a motion to stop deportation, something unexpected stirred in her. Not guilt, fear, because her name, her initials, her rushed decision in that 12-minute hearing were now inside an official document, and someone was asking questions. The child, Emmanuel, had survived, and the mother, the one they said had no resources, no defense, no case, was still here, still praying, still breathing, still fighting. Judge Ellison slammed her pen on the desk. She called the clerk, ordered the case sealed. "Temporary hold. I need to review all transcripts," she said, but it was already too late, because Clara, quiet, trembling Clara, had made digital copies of everything and sent them, not to the press, not to the courthouse, but to someone who used to work inside the system, a woman who had once worn the same robe and taken it off in protest. Her name was Lenora James. Black, fierce, and no longer willing to play by the rules of a game designed to crush women who looked like her. She picked up the file, read it twice, and called Clara. "I'll represent her," she said. "Pro bono, but you need to get that girl in front of a judge. Fast." Clara's voice cracked. "She's being deported in 5 hours." Lenora didn't flinch. "Then we have 4. And somewhere deep in the detention center, Mariella sat on the floor of her cell, eyes closed, hands pressed together. Not begging, not bargaining, just breathing the name again. Emmanuel. Because sometimes a prayer isn't a request, it's a declaration. And this time, heaven wasn't the only one listening. The sky was still dark when Clara's car pulled into the back lot of the immigration facility. No press, no sirens, just fog curling around the fences like breath held too long. She wore no badge this time, no clipboard, only conviction. In her hands, a court order, signed, stamped, and fragile. Because windows like this don't stay open, not for women like Mariella, not in places built to forget them. Inside, the guards hesitated. One called a supervisor. Another whispered into a radio. Clara didn't wait. She placed the document flat on the counter. "Emergency stay of deportation," she said, "filed under federal review, effective immediately." The supervisor scoffed. "Not our problem. She's already on the bus." Clara's voice didn't rise. "Then you better run." Across the lot, engines were rumbling. The deportation convoy, 3 buses lined up like coffins on wheels, had already begun to move. But inside the third one, chained at the ankles, face pressed to the cold glass, Mariella wasn't watching the guards. She was watching the sky, because something strange was happening there. The clouds, so thick all night, had begun to part, and a single shaft of light, not warm, not strong, but real, slipped through the steel grey, like morning had chosen her. Then a voice outside, shouts, footsteps. The bus hissed to a stop, the doors flung open, and for a moment no one moved. Then a man climbed aboard, breathless, clipboard shaking in his hands. He looked at her, directly. "Santos, off the bus!" The chains clanked as she stood. The other women watched, some with hope, some with something quieter, like memories of chances they never got. The guard unlocked her cuffs. For the first time in days, her wrists were her own. As she stepped off the bus, Clara was waiting, not with a smile, but with a letter, a summons, from Judge Lenora James, set for 10 a.m., a hearing, a chance. Mariella took it in her hands like it might break, but her eyes, they were no longer soft, they were steady, alive. She had no makeup, no lawyer's suit, no crowd to applaud her, but she had her name, her story, and the fire of every woman the system had tried to erase. Inside her, the prayer was changing. Not, God, save me, but let them hear me. And across the city, a hospital room filled with light, tiny fingers curled around tubes, a heartbeat steadier than before. Emmanuel was waiting, but not everyone wanted this story heard. In a locked office downtown, Judge Ellison stared at the email on her screen and picked up the phone, because she had one more move left, and it wouldn't be quiet. At exactly 10:03 a.m., Mariela Santos sat in a courtroom that wasn't built for her. The walls were too clean, the lights too bright, and the people too cold. Everything about the space told her she didn't belong there. Not the guard at the door, not the silence in the benches, and especially not the judge's chair sitting high above the room. But across from her, sitting calmly with a briefcase full of truth, was attorney Lenora James. Mariella didn't understand most of what was being said. The legal terms, the objections, the protocols, it was all noise to her. But she recognized one thing clearly. Someone was finally speaking on her behalf, not over her, not around her, for her. Lenora stood with steady hands as she presented the evidence. The handwritten name on the fabric, the rushed deportation order, the hospital record showing that Emmanuel had been admitted just hours before Mariella was removed from custody. She spoke clearly, with urgency and respect. This was no performance. This was survival. The government attorney objected several times, insisting that the system acted properly and that the child was never in critical custody of the mother. But Lenora didn't back down. She asked one question over and over. Why wasn't she given a chance to speak? Mariella sat still, her hands folded in her lap as the photos were shown. A grey t-shirt stained with blood and milk, her own name scribbled next to a hospital tag, and finally, a photo of Emmanuel in the NICU, tiny, intubated, fighting for breath. For the first time in the entire case, the courtroom went quiet. The judge presiding over the hearing wasn't Ellison. She had recused herself late the night before, claiming a scheduling conflict. Mariella didn't know this. She only knew that this new judge, a younger woman with tired eyes, seemed to actually be listening. When Mariella was finally asked if she had anything to say, she stood without waiting for translation. She didn't give a speech. She didn't cry. I never left him, she said quietly in broken English. He is my son. I carried him. I crossed for him. I bled for him. Please, don't take him. That was all. No applause followed. No promises were made. The judge called for a recess. Mariella returned to a small waiting room with Clara and Lenora by her side, both exhausted, both silent. It would take 40 minutes for the decision to come down. When the clerk finally entered the room, her face was unreadable. She handed Lenora a sealed envelope and left. Lenora opened it slowly, read the contents, and looked at Mariella. Deportation order revoked, she said. They're releasing you. And they're granting you temporary custody. Mariella didn't move. She just stared at her. She hadn't expected this moment to arrive. Not this way. Not with a piece of paper and a sentence that changed everything. Clara put her hand on Mariella's shoulder. You can see him today, she whispered. He's waiting for you. But outside that courtroom, in a separate office, another phone was ringing. A call had been made. Someone was not happy about the ruling. And Judge Ellison, though silent now, had started putting pressure on another part of the system. Mariella had won the first fight, but the war for her child had only just begun. The hospital smelled like bleach and something colder, not death exactly, but something that sat nearby. Mariella walked through the automatic doors with a badge clipped to her shirt, borrowed clothes too big for her, and the court order clutched in her hand like a lifeline. Clara was beside her, making sure the nurses at the front desk had already been notified. The hospital administrator didn't smile when he looked at Mariella. He barely looked at her at all. But he read the paperwork, nodded once and motioned for them to follow. The walk to the NICU felt endless. Every hallway, every closed door felt like another reminder that this was not a place made for women like her. The rooms were quiet, except for the soft beeping of machines and the occasional cough behind a curtain. When they reached the last door on the left, the administrator turned to her. "He's stable," he said without emotion, "but he's not out of danger. You'll need to wear gloves, mask, gown." Mariella nodded quickly, even though her hands were already trembling. A nurse helped her scrub in. Then Clara stepped back, giving her space. The door opened. Inside, everything was small. The lights were dim. The machines whispered constantly. And in the center of it all, wrapped in white blankets, lay a baby too tiny for the world he'd been born into. Mariella froze. For a second, she didn't move. She just stared at the crib, at the wires, the monitors, the slow rise and fall of his chest. And then, like something ancient waking up, she stepped forward. Her hands hovered over his body, careful not to touch the tubes or the delicate skin stretched over his ribs. A nurse gave her a nod. She was allowed. She placed one gloved hand on his chest. It was the smallest contact, but it shattered something in her. She let out a sound, half sigh, half sob, and then leaned closer until her forehead touched the plastic edge of the crib. He was warm. He was alive. "Emmanuel," she whispered. The baby's eyelids fluttered. Just for a second, it could have been a reflex. It could have meant nothing, but to her, it was everything. She stayed like that for a long time. Minutes, maybe hours. She didn't care. She sang to him under her breath, the same song her mother once sang to her when the soldiers came through the village, and the only way to survive was to stay hidden. In that moment, there was no courtroom, no detention center, no chains. Just a mother and her child, together. But peace doesn't last long in a system built to take it away. Downstairs, an ICE officer was waiting in the lobby. He wasn't there to arrest anyone. Not today. But he had a file under his arm with Mariella's name on it. Inside that file was a new petition, an emergency appeal, filed anonymously but traced back to someone with authority, someone who wasn't finished losing, someone who still had one move left. And this time, they weren't coming for Mariella, they were coming for Emmanuel. The next morning began quietly, but not peacefully. The nurses brought Mariella a chair so she could sleep beside Emmanuel's crib, though no one really believed she slept at all. Her eyes stayed half open through the night, fixed on the rise and fall of his chest. She refused food, refused rest. She had her hand on his blanket and her heart buried inside that plastic box at 6:40 a.m. Auntie Clara arrived with breakfast and a weak smile. But the moment she saw the man standing outside the NICU doors, clipboard in hand, badge on his belt, her smile vanished. She knew the look. He wasn't a nurse, he wasn't a doctor, and he wasn't here to help. Mariella noticed the shift in Clara's face. She stood immediately, her back straightened, her instincts sharper than sleep. When the man walked into the room, he didn't greet anyone. He simply pulled a folded packet from his folder and looked directly at Clara. "I'm here under Order 47C, Emergency State Petition," he said. "The child is now under review for protective custody. Immediate transfer to foster care has been requested." Clara's voice dropped. "Requested by who?" The man didn't answer. "The petition is sealed, but the judge who signed it approved emergency placement until a formal hearing." Clara stepped forward. "She has custody. A signed ruling." "That child is with his mother." He shrugged, almost bored. "That ruling is under appeal, and until it's resolved, he's considered state property." Mariella didn't understand every word, but she understood enough. They were trying to take her baby again. She stepped in front of the crib, placing both arms around the edge like a shield. Her face was pale but burning with something deeper than fear, something older, heavier. Clara turned to the nurse on duty. "Do not remove that baby. Don't touch him, not unless you want to be named in a civil suit." The nurse froze. She hadn't signed up for this. The officer pulled out his phone and made a call. He turned his back slightly, whispering. Clara used that second to lean close to Mariella. They're exploiting a loophole. Someone powerful reopened the case. I don't know how high it goes. Mariella didn't blink. What do I do? Clara hesitated. Then she said the only thing that mattered. You hold him. Right now. Skin to skin. If they want to take him, they'll have to touch you too. Mariella slipped off her hospital gown and gently pulled her son into her arms. The nurse adjusted the wires and tubes so that he could rest against her chest. For the first time, without plastic or gloves between them, she held him. He stirred, just slightly, his head fit perfectly against her collarbone. He belonged there. A second nurse entered the room, followed by a hospital administrator who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. We need to comply, he whispered to Clara. We could lose funding. Clara didn't answer. Her eyes stayed locked on the officer as he ended his call and turned back toward them. He looked at Mariella, he looked at the baby, and for the briefest moment, he hesitated, not out of compassion, not out of doubt, out of calculation. Then he stepped back. Fine, a 24-hour delay. But we'll be back tomorrow with a court officer and a signed removal order. He turned and walked out. Clara didn't speak. She simply looked at the clock. 24 hours. That was all they had, to find the leak, to stop the appeal, to save the child. And in another part of the city, in a private office with tall windows and closed blinds, Judge Martha Ellison was pouring herself a second cup of coffee. She had just made a call of her own. This wasn't about the law anymore. It was about making sure this girl, this immigrant, this nothing, didn't win. The clock had never moved faster. By 9 a.m., Clara was already on the phone with Lenora James, relaying everything. The surprise petition, the sealed motion, the officer's visit, the threat of removal. Lenora didn't curse. She didn't raise her voice. She just asked one question. Was it Ellison? Clara didn't need to answer. They both knew. Judge Ellison still had influence, contacts in the court system, favors owed, clerks trained to bend without snapping. It wasn't about legality anymore. It was about pride, control. A woman like Mariella wasn't supposed to win, not against someone like her. By mid-morning, Lenora was in motion. She filed a countersuit requesting a federal injunction on the emergency removal. She called 3 reporters who still owed her stories. Then she reached out to a woman named Sylvia Vega, a former foster care investigator who had been blacklisted after reporting abuse in the system. We need a name, Lenora said. Who pushed this through? Sylvia hesitated. Then she sighed. There's a juvenile magistrate downtown who owes Ellison a seat. If this went through last night, it probably crossed his desk. Then send me his name, Lenora said. I'll drag him into the light if I have to. Back at the hospital, Mariella refused to let go of her son. Nurses came in and out with medicine, monitors, paperwork, but she stayed seated, his body against hers, her eyes fixed on the door, as if it might devour him if she looked away. Emmanuel's breathing had stabilized. The doctors called it unexpected progress. Mariella didn't speak. She just kept whispering the same phrase under her breath. No me lo van a quitar. They won't take him from me. Around noon, Clara stepped out into the hospital courtyard to make another call. She didn't notice the woman watching her from a bench nearby. Light blazer, sunglasses, silent phone in her lap. An ICE intelligence officer, sent not to act, but to observe. Back inside, Mariella noticed something strange. One of the nurses had changed. Not just new to the rotation, but different. Eyes that didn't linger, gloves that shook. She was adjusting the IV drip when Mariella reached out and grabbed her wrist. The woman flinched, hard. Who sent you? Mariella asked, her voice flat. The nurse stammered. I just started today. I'm a temp. But Mariella had seen that look before. Back home, when neighbors gave you away to soldiers, when silence had weight. She pressed the emergency button. Clara came running. The woman was gone before security could ask her name. At 3:00 p.m., Lenora arrived in person. She had the motion in her hand, a temporary restraining order signed by a federal judge. It blocked any attempt to transfer Emmanuel from the hospital until Mariella's case was reviewed in full. "It'll hold them off," she told Clara. "But it's not enough. Ellison's playing a longer game. She wants to prove Mariella is unfit. If she can't take the baby through the courts, she'll try through child services." Clara nodded. "Then we stay here. We document everything. We don't let them twist the truth." By nightfall, 3 nurses and 2 doctors had submitted statements declaring that Mariella was attentive, calm, and responsive to all medical directions. Emmanuel's vitals remained steady. He had opened his eyes for the first time. A nurse caught the moment on her phone. The photo was blurry. Mariella was holding him in a blue blanket. His tiny fingers were curled against her skin. Her eyes were red from exhaustion, but her face was lit by something stronger than sleep, stronger than fear, something Ellison couldn't erase. The photo was sent to Lenora. Lenora sent it to the press. And when it reached the inbox of a junior editor at a national paper, someone who had grown up in a family like Mariella's, the story began to shift. The phone at Ellison's office rang. Again and again. She didn't answer. She knew what was coming. The public didn't know the full story yet. But they had seen enough to ask one dangerous question. Why is a mother being punished for trying to hold her child? At the hospital, the lights dimmed for the night. The nurses changed shifts, and the officer who had come to take the baby never returned. But everyone knew he would be back, and next time he might not be alone. By sunrise, the hospital was no longer quiet. A reporter had shown up just before 7 a.m., a young Latina with a microphone and a camera operator who kept his distance. She wasn't from a major outlet, not yet, but her instinct was sharp. She had read the leaked court filing. She had seen the photo. She knew the weight of that moment. A migrant mother, a nearly deported newborn, and a judge whose name was suddenly being whispered in places that once praised her. Clara tried to stall the interview, but Lenora gave her a subtle nod. "Let them see the truth," she said. At 8:45 a.m., the story hit social media. A short video clip, just under 2 minutes. No dramatic music, no narration, only real footage. Mariella holding Emmanuel, Clara explaining the medical records, and Lenora saying clear and direct, "This child was never abandoned. He was taken, and now that he's alive, they're trying to erase his mother." The video exploded. By 9:15, the hospital received over 300 calls, some offering donations, others demanding accountability. People were angry, not because they knew all the details, but because they had seen enough injustice to recognize another one when it crawled into daylight. That's when the courthouse made its move. At exactly 10:07 a.m., a black SUV pulled up to the ER entrance. Inside were 2 child protective officers, 1 ICE supervisor, and a woman from family court with a clipboard already signed. They didn't speak to the press. They didn't take questions. They came to collect the baby. But the moment they entered the NICU hallway, they stopped, because standing between them and the incubator were 5 nurses, not armed, not angry, just standing, shoulder to shoulder, calm, refusing to move. Clara stepped forward, her badge clipped, her voice clear. "This child is under emergency federal protection. Any attempt to remove him violates a direct court order." One of the officers raised his voice. "I don't care about federal orders. We're acting under state jurisdiction." But before he could finish, Lenora appeared beside Clara, holding a second document. "This is a cease and desist signed by the Federal District Court at 8:32 this morning. Your agency is now in contempt. If you touch that child, I will make sure you lose your job, your pension, and every ounce of credibility you ever had." The hallway froze. The officers looked to each other. The woman with the clipboard stepped back. And then the ICE supervisor, tall, red-faced, his jacket unbuttoned, sighed. "This isn't worth it," he muttered. "Let it go." He turned and walked out. The others followed. Just like that, they were gone. Mariella was still holding Emmanuel. She hadn't moved during the entire confrontation. Her back was pressed to the wall, her arms curled around him like armor. When the last footstep echoed down the hallway, her knees gave out. She didn't fall. Clara caught her, held her, helped her back into the chair. The nurses reset the monitors. The room began to breathe again. Outside, people were already gathering. Not a mob, not a protest, just women, mothers, quiet, holding signs with handwritten words, "Let her stay. A baby is not a case number. She is his voice." News vans arrived. Reporters started live streams. Hashtags began trending. And in a small office several miles away, Judge Martha Ellison watched the footage on her phone. She sat alone. No phone calls, no aides, just the echo of her own name, now spoken not with reverence, but with scrutiny. She set the phone down, stared at the window. She would not be seen as the villain, not like this. There was one final step she could take, but to do it, she would have to break the very rule she once wrote herself. Mariella held Emmanuel through the night, long after the hospital had settled into its soft rhythm of quiet machines and half-sleeping nurses. No one asked her to leave. No one dared. Outside, the world kept spinning. Her face, once unknown, had now been shared across millions of screens. Strangers were saying her name. Journalists were digging into court records. A senator had tweeted a demand for a federal investigation. Someone had started a fundraiser. But Mariella didn't care about any of that. She only cared about the sound of her baby's breath. By morning, the hospital received an email from the federal courthouse. The immigration case had been closed, permanently. The judge's signature at the bottom wasn't Ellison's. It belonged to a senior federal judge who had reviewed the entire process overnight and declared it, in writing, a grave miscarriage of justice. Mariella's deportation order was nullified, her record sealed. She was free. That same morning, the Department of Child Services dropped their custody petition, quietly, without apology. No cameras, no explanations. Just a quiet notice of withdrawal sent by email. The same hands that had once signed her removal were now trying to vanish from the trail. In the days that followed, Clara was reassigned, not punished, just moved. A transfer, for her safety. She didn't protest. She was tired. But she promised Mariella she'd stay in touch. She kissed Emmanuel on the forehead and whispered, "You did that, little one. You made them listen." Lenora declined every interview she was offered. She didn't want a spotlight. She just wanted the next girl, and the next, and the next, to have someone like her waiting. Mariella stayed in the hospital until Emmanuel was strong enough to go home. A shelter took them in. Then a local church helped her find a lawyer for residency papers. She started English classes, bought a used stroller, walked everywhere. She didn't speak at rallies, didn't pose for articles. She wasn't looking to become a symbol. She just wanted to be a mother. But something strange began to happen. Letters arrived, dozens at first, then hundreds, from other women. Women in Arizona, in Georgia, in New York. Some wrote in Spanish, others in Creole, one in Portuguese. All of them said the same thing, in different ways. "I thought I was the only one. Thank you for surviving. I kept my child's name secret too." Mariella read each one. She didn't reply, but she kept them in a small box under her bed, alongside the piece of grey fabric, the one with the name still written across it. Emmanuel. He was sitting up now, laughing, reaching for the light. And one afternoon in a quiet park, under a sky finally free of sirens, Mariella took him in her arms and whispered, "They tried to take everything from me, but I gave you a name, and now the world knows it too." Justice didn't come with sirens. It came in stillness, in survival, in a voice that refused to die quietly. They had locked her away thinking it would silence her, but her story found another way to fly. Across wires. Across borders. Across the skies of paper, until it reached hearts like yours. If this story touched something in you, leave a comment. Share it with someone who needs it, because some truths aren't shouted, they're whispered, until the whole world starts to hear them.